Growing up in America, I always felt like a misplaced puzzle piece in a family that could never quite form a complete picture. Our residence in Connecticut was an impressive colonial mansion with towering white pillars that seemed to reach endlessly toward the heavens and meticulously maintained lawns where even the boldest weed wouldn't dare appear. Strangers passing by would glimpse our estate and envision warmth and heritage, but behind those imposing walls, compassion existed more as a fleeting shadow than a welcomed presence. Much of my youth was spent observing from the sidelines, absorbing conversations, silently yearning for tenderness that seldom materialized. My father, William Montgomery, was a man who thrived on structure and recognition, while my mother, Catherine, maintained her composure through little more than elegant jewelry and quiet endurance. My brother, Michael, dedicated most of his energy to avoiding confrontation, mastering the art of becoming invisible when tensions arose. The evening of my parents' anniversary celebration was meant to mark a turning point. There was discussion of joy, unity, and healing the fractures that had long scarred our family's foundation. Deep down, I understood it would merely be another carefully orchestrated performance, yet hope possesses a remarkable persistence. I arrived behind schedule that evening, detained by an interminable board meeting in Miami and traffic on Interstate 95 that moved with the speed of cold honey. As my driver navigated onto the lengthy, curved driveway, I observed the house illuminated against the darkness, every window radiating light like an invitation I questioned whether to embrace. I emerged from the vehicle, my heels creating sharp sounds against the gravel, the thick air clinging to my skin. Before reaching the entrance, I could detect the laughter, too boisterous, too artificial, and the musical chiming of crystal stemware. I drew a steadying breath, preparing myself mentally, and stepped inside. The moment I crossed into the foyer, nearly every pair of eyes in the dining room shifted toward me. They attempted to conceal their stares, but their attention felt like harsh stage lighting. Dad positioned himself at the table's head, already having consumed several glasses of premium French wine. His laughter resonated powerfully, bouncing off the soaring ceilings and traveling through the corridors. The dining room overflowed with relatives, neighbors, and business associates, all impeccably dressed. My sister-in-law, Rebecca, balanced little Thomas on her hip while attempting to soothe him and simultaneously gathering fragments of a shattered plate from the floor. The room, already crackling with anxious energy, grew even more tense as my father's voice sliced through the atmosphere like a blade. "Stop coddling your child and clean this mess up," Dad bellowed, gesturing toward Rebecca with a tone that painted her cheeks crimson. Everyone present froze momentarily, and then, because no one wished to appear out of place, several people began laughing. Some laughter emerged awkwardly, some nervously, but all of it felt fundamentally wrong. It wasn't amusing. It never was. I felt my jaw clench as I watched Rebecca struggle to manage Thomas while cleaning the debris. My mother remained seated at the opposite end of the table, gaze fixed on her plate, as though ignoring the situation might make it vanish. Michael, perpetually the mediator, attempted to redirect our father's attention with a comment about the wine, but Dad dismissed him with a casual wave. As I advanced several steps into the dining room, my father's focus snapped to me. He narrowed his eyes, registering my tardy arrival, and the entire room seemed to hush, the laughter fading completely. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I struggled to maintain my composure, reminding myself to breathe steadily. I glanced toward my mother, hoping for even the smallest sign of support, but she refused to meet my eyes. I moved past the sideboard and placed my purse on a chair. The air hung heavy with the aromas of roast beef, candles, and underlying tension. My father cleared his throat dramatically, ensuring he commanded everyone's attention, as if the gathering itself was another of his corporate presentations. "No more excuses tonight," Dad declared, his voice escalating. "Are you going to help or what?" He pointed directly at me, as if challenging me to refuse. I noticed several guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats, discomfort flickering across their expressions. I wondered how many of them carried similar stories, moments when they were forced to choose between personal dignity and family harmony. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my keys, but my voice remained steady when I responded. "No." There was nothing more to articulate. I refused to continue cleaning up his messes anymore, whether literal or metaphorical. My father's face turned deep red, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Then get out," he roared, his voice echoing up the staircase and down the hallways. The shockwave of his fury rippled through the room, silencing any remaining nervous giggles. I surveyed the room one final time. My mother kept her head lowered, the pearls at her throat trembling almost imperceptibly. Michael looked at me, a silent apology written across his features. I could see, for the briefest moment, the pain in his eyes, pain that mirrored my own. Rebecca remained crouched on the floor, tears threatening to fall, clutching Thomas protectively. Without another word, I straightened my posture and departed. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step making a statement. I didn't slam the door or raise my voice. I didn't look back. I left them with their celebration, their laughter, their willful ignorance. As I walked into the cool Connecticut night, the stars above the old house seemed almost indifferent. The wind carried the distant sounds of the party, a world I no longer belonged to, a world that had never truly been mine. What no one inside that house realized, not my father with his commanding orders or my mother with her averted gaze, was that their world was built on something I controlled. They lived within my empire, a fortune worth $147 million, and all of it could disappear as quickly as I could snap my fingers. That night, as I settled into my car and asked my driver to return me to Miami, I knew everything had fundamentally changed. I had allowed them to mistake my silence for weakness for far too long. Tomorrow, they would discover what it meant to lose their comfort, their certainty, and perhaps, just perhaps, they'd finally realize that the outsider was the only one holding everything together. The following morning, Miami was painted in gentle shades of gold and rose. I stood barefoot on the balcony of my villa, overlooking Biscayne Bay, allowing the salt-tinged air to fill my lungs. From this vantage point, the world appeared vast and promising, a world where I could finally breathe freely. The glass walls behind me caught the early light, scattering it across marble floors, over sculptures and paintings I'd collected during travels through Europe, Venice, Paris, London. Downstairs, the gentle hum of the housekeeper preparing coffee was the only sound. For the first time in years, I felt entirely awake, entirely myself. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I scrolled through messages, reminders from the estate manager, congratulatory texts from friends, a few work emails from the investment firm I'd built from the ground up. But none of that mattered in this moment. There was something that needed to be set in motion, a line I needed to cross to finally close the chapter on everything Connecticut had ever meant to me. I found Marcus' number in my favorites. My lawyer had always been efficient and discreet, and after last night, I knew I could trust him not to question my resolve. He answered on the second ring, his British accent still crisp despite years in Florida. "Good morning, Victoria," he said, sounding both curious and prepared. "Is everything all right?" I watched a seagull dive into the sparkling bay. "It's time, Marcus. Sell everything. The house in Connecticut, the farm in Vermont, the apartments in Chicago. Put it all on the market. No exceptions." There was the briefest pause, just long enough for me to imagine his eyebrows rising. "Understood," he said, businesslike as always. "I'll get started immediately. Would you like me to inform the family?" A coldness crept into my voice. "No, they'll find out soon enough. Make sure the paperwork is perfect. I don't want any loopholes, no chance for anyone to contest." He cleared his throat gently. "I'll be thorough as always." I ended the call and set the phone on the balcony railing, staring out at the city that had become my sanctuary. In that moment, I realized how small the rest of the world had become to me. All those years I'd spent trying to prove my worth in the house I'd just walked away from, holding my tongue, pretending to be at peace. I could finally let it all go. I wandered through my villa, the smooth, cool tile under my feet a reminder of just how far I'd come from my childhood in Connecticut. The living room was flooded with sunlight, illuminating the abstract canvases I'd discovered in a Parisian gallery. Each one represented a piece of a different story: a wild night in Barcelona, a rainy afternoon in London, a silent morning on the coast of Portugal. These rooms, with their floor-to-ceiling windows and subtle, European-inspired decor, felt alive in a way the Connecticut house never did. I paused at the glass dining table, running my hand over the crystal bowl in its center. It had belonged to my grandmother, a woman of quiet strength who had survived more than I would ever know. I thought of her often, especially in moments like this, and wondered what she would think of the path I'd taken. Would she understand my need to break free, to finally choose myself over obligation? By noon, the phone started ringing. First, my brother Michael. I let it ring. I could imagine him pacing the hallway in Connecticut, voice tight with confusion or regret. Maybe both. I didn't want to hear apologies or explanations. I was done carrying the weight of everyone else's comfort. Next came my mother. She left a voicemail, her voice soft, a little shaky, as if she were rehearsing for an audience that never arrived. Victoria, darling, I hope you got home safely. We missed you after you left last night. Your father was just, well, he was upset. Please call me when you can. I deleted the message. I couldn't let myself be pulled back in. Finally, my father called. He didn't leave a message. I pictured him in his study, fuming, running a hand through his thinning hair, demanding answers from anyone who would listen. It struck me how little I cared. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to apologize for my absence or soften the blow of my decisions. I felt only relief. I turned off my phone and walked out to the pool deck, sunlight shimmering on the turquoise water. The sky above Miami was a wide expanse, unbroken by anything but the occasional wispy cloud. I let my robe fall to the chaise lounge and slipped into the water, the coolness closing over me like a promise. With every stroke, I left behind another piece of the life I'd just abandoned. After swimming, I lay on my back, floating, letting the sun warm my face. I closed my eyes and thought about what freedom meant. It wasn't about the money, not really. My empire had always been a tool, a way to build the independence I craved. It meant being able to choose who I kept in my life, where I spent my days, and what kind of future I wanted to shape. It meant I could support the arts, fund scholarships for girls with dreams as big as mine once were, and buy time for myself in the form of quiet mornings and long, luxurious afternoons. As the day stretched on, I wandered through my gardens, listening to the sound of palm leaves rustling in the breeze. I thought about all the years I'd spent trapped in old expectations, about how many times I'd been told to be quieter, nicer, less ambitious. All those voices belonged to a life I'd finally left behind. That afternoon, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and watched the city shimmer in the heat, its towers sparkling in the distance. Miami was full of life, music drifting from open windows, laughter from boats on the bay, the ever-present possibility of reinvention. Here, no one cared about my last name, my family history, or the things I'd chosen to walk away from. Here, I was just Victoria, a woman with a villa, a vision, and finally, the freedom to live exactly as she pleased. I knew my decision would send shockwaves through my family, that the coming days would be filled with angry calls and frantic emails. But for now, the silence was golden. For now, I could savor the sweetness of a new beginning, built entirely on my terms. After the dust settled from my decision to sell everything in Connecticut, Miami truly became my sanctuary. The transition wasn't immediate, of course. Even as my lawyer, Marcus, handled the sales and finalized the transactions, there was a kind of emotional debris that lingered. I felt it in the quiet hours of the morning when the sun would rise pink and gold over Biscayne Bay, and in the evenings when the city lights glittered like scattered diamonds. But slowly, the sting of the past faded, replaced by the excitement of creating something entirely my own. My first few weeks in Miami were a blur of rediscovery. I wandered the Art Deco streets of South Beach, letting myself get lost in the color and noise. I ate at little cafes tucked away on side streets, places where nobody knew my name or my story. It was liberating to be anonymous, to shed the expectations of the Montgomery family, and simply exist as Victoria. One afternoon, as I strolled through Wynwood, I met Alina. She was leaning against the wall of her art gallery, her wild curls haloed by the afternoon sun, clipboard in hand, checking off a list of deliveries. "You look like you could use a friend," she called out with a mischievous grin. I laughed, surprised at her openness, and before I knew it, I was inside her gallery, surrounded by canvases bursting with color and energy. Alina introduced me to a world I'd always admired from a distance. She knew every artist in Miami, could talk for hours about the meaning of a brushstroke, and never apologized for her passion. We became fast friends. Friday nights were spent sipping wine and talking art, and on Saturdays we'd walk the neighborhoods, hunting for new murals. She was the first person in years who wanted to know me, not my bank account or my family legacy. Through Alina, I met Diego, a sailing instructor with sun-bleached hair and an easy laugh. He taught me how to navigate Biscayne Bay, guiding me through shallow waters and into the open blue. "Let the wind carry you," he'd say, grinning as he handed me the tiller. With him, I learned to trust myself in new ways. On the water, everything else faded. No family drama, no regrets, just the rhythm of the waves and the freedom of the horizon. Inspired by my new friendships, I started investing my time and money into things that mattered to me. I donated to local charities, women's shelters, youth programs, and arts initiatives. For years, I'd watched my family write checks for social causes, but I wanted to see the impact with my own eyes. I met young women who reminded me of myself, ambitious, underestimated, determined to build their futures. Their stories moved me, and soon I was funding scholarships for girls across Miami, giving them the chance to chase dreams no one thought possible. One morning, while wandering downtown, I passed a little cafe with chipped blue paint and a crooked sign that read Luna's. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Carmen, was struggling to keep the doors open. Something about the place tugged at my heart, a warmth and resilience that felt familiar. After a long conversation over coffee and homemade muffins, I decided to buy the cafe. I kept Carmen on as manager, hired local women for the kitchen, and together we turned Luna's into a gathering spot for the neighborhood. It was a place where people belonged, no matter where they came from. For the first time, I felt what it meant to build something meaningful and lasting. Of course, the past never disappears entirely. Now and then, someone from Connecticut would try to break through my new life. Michael, my brother, wrote long, rambling emails filled with apologies and explanations. "Dad was always so angry," he confessed in one message. "It's different now. We miss you. I miss you." For a while, I would read his words late at night, feeling a pang of nostalgia or guilt, but I knew better than to go back. My father's temper and my mother's silence were chains I'd broken for a reason. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to walk away. My mother tried to reach out, too, in her way, postcards from her new apartment in Boston, awkward Christmas cards with carefully scripted notes. I appreciated the gestures, but there was no way to undo years of pretending and pain. I sent polite replies, wishing her well, but never promising more than that. Even at a distance, I had to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build. My empire was no longer about numbers on a bank statement or properties on a spreadsheet. It was about choice. I became passionate about learning how to manage my portfolio, taking online courses in finance, reading comprehensive books about investments, and sitting down with advisors who spoke to me as an equal. I put money into tech companies in San Francisco, eco-friendly brands in London, and a new line of organic skincare in Paris. Each investment felt like planting a seed, not just for profit, but for possibility. Travel became part of my rhythm. I'd hop a flight to Paris to visit a friend opening a new boutique or spend a week in London attending gallery shows. Each trip reminded me of the world's size and variety. But I always returned to Miami, to the villa that overlooked the bay, to Alina's laughter and Diego's sailing lessons, to Luna's cafe and the friendships I'd nurtured. Home was no longer a place of inherited memories. It was a sanctuary I'd made for myself, filled with joy and belonging. There were quiet days, 2 afternoons spent reading on the balcony, mornings when I'd linger over breakfast and the crossword. Sometimes I'd look back and marvel at how different my life had become. I wasn't the scared, silent girl from Connecticut anymore. I was a woman who chose her path, who had the courage to leave and the strength to build anew. In those moments, I felt a peace I'd never known. My days were filled with purpose, laughter shared with friends, hands-on work in the community, nights spent dreaming up new adventures. Miami had given me more than freedom. It had given me myself. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never look back. A year had passed since I walked out of my parents' anniversary party in Connecticut, and sometimes, when I thought back to that night, it felt like watching a film of someone else's life. The woman who'd tiptoed around other people's moods and held her breath at family dinners was gone. I could see her, but she didn't belong to me anymore. In her place stood a version of myself I never could have imagined, a woman grounded, content, and undeniably free. It was New Year's Eve in Miami, and my villa was alive with energy and laughter. The air was warm, tinged with the faintest ocean breeze. Through the open glass doors, I could hear the music spilling out onto the terrace, the low hum of conversation blending with the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore. I stood on the balcony, Elena and Diego on either side of me, as we watched the first bursts of fireworks bloom over the city. Elena, glass of champagne in hand, grinned at me, her cheeks flushed with happiness. "Can you believe it?" she said, gesturing toward the bay where the sky was turning gold and silver. "1 year ago, you were running from your past, and now look at you." Diego nodded, leaning on the railing. "You built a new life, Victoria. I hope you're proud of yourself." "We are." I smiled, but it wasn't the brittle smile I used to wear, the one meant to hide discomfort or smooth over tension. This one was genuine, soft, the kind that came from deep within. "I am proud," I admitted, the words feeling like a kind of magic on my tongue, "and grateful. For all of this, for both of you, for this city, for this new beginning." As the clock inched closer to midnight, the memories came rushing in, uninvited but not unwelcome. I remembered the night I left Connecticut, how final it had felt to shut the door behind me, how heavy my heart had been. The fear, the doubts, the endless questions about whether I was doing the right thing. And then, slowly, the relief that grew as the distance between me and my old life widened. The months that followed were a mixture of chaos and calm. There were moments when I worried about my family, about whether they'd be able to handle the changes, whether I'd regret cutting those ties. But as time went on, I realized that what I missed wasn't them exactly. It was the idea of family I'd carried with me all those years, the hope that they might someday accept me as I was, the longing for a kind of love they simply couldn't give. Selling the properties had been surprisingly easy. Marcus had managed every detail with precision and tact. The Connecticut house sold first, then the farm in Vermont, then the apartments in Chicago. Each transaction felt like closing a chapter, as if the past was slowly being boxed up and sent away. My family, at first, was furious. My father left angry voicemails demanding explanations. My mother wrote letters that grew more desperate, then resigned. Michael, for all his efforts to stay neutral, finally accepted that I was determined to live life on my terms. They moved out, each to their own smaller homes. For the first time, they had to confront their limitations, their own lives. We kept in touch, occasional calls, polite messages on birthdays and holidays, but the intimacy was gone. It was as though a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape that was stark but honest. I didn't mourn what we'd lost. Instead, I celebrated what I'd found. In Miami, my days were rich with meaning. I poured my energy into Luna's Cafe, working with Carmen to expand our menu, support local artists, and create a community space where everyone felt welcome. The scholarships I'd funded began to bear fruit. I got letters from young women who were thriving at university, launching their businesses, finding their voices. Elena's gallery flourished, too, and I was there for every opening, proud to support her dream. Diego and I spent countless afternoons on the bay, sailing beneath the endless sky. On the water, I felt most alive, unencumbered, daring, full of possibility. He taught me to read the wind, to trust my instincts, to let go of things I couldn't control. We became close, and in time our friendship deepened into something more, a gentle, steady kind of love, rooted in respect and laughter. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone. I was enough. Sometimes people would ask me about my story, how I'd built my empire, why I'd left my family, what it felt like to start over. At first, I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but with each retelling, the shame faded. I stopped apologizing for my choices. I told the truth. I chose happiness over history. I chose myself, and I had no regrets. There were still difficult days, of course. Sometimes, in the quiet of the early morning, a pang of sadness would catch me off guard. I'd think about my childhood, about what could have been different, about the love I'd always wanted. But those moments were brief, softened by the life I'd created and the people who filled it with light. As midnight struck and the fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for more money or success, but for continued courage. The courage to keep choosing myself, day after day, to keep opening new doors, to keep walking away from anything that didn't serve my joy. I looked around at my friends, at my home, at the city that had welcomed me as I was, and I felt something settle inside me. Not the old ache of longing, but a quiet, profound peace. I had spent so many years chasing approval, trying to fit into a story that wasn't mine. Now, I was writing my own, and every sunrise over the bay reminded me, sometimes, walking away is the beginning of everything.